Today's episode is sponsored by Future State Media, experts in off-Amazon traffic for Amazon sellers. Future State Media will build you a custom-made website to deliver sales for you on Amazon. Built to grab traffic from search engines and social media, your site can be used as a secret weapon for launching products on Amazon or just to stabilize your Amazon sales. It means you can also build an email list on autopilot. Go to futurestatemedia.com for your free guide to Google SEO for Amazon sellers today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Amazing FBA podcast, the place to be for UK-based Amazon sellers, although in fact, a lot of what we discuss is relevant in the US particularly as well. And today's guest is no exception. There's some Fernando Cruz of Marketplace Ops and Pixelfy. They supercharge Amazon sales for brands by managing their accounts, amongst other things. And I Pixelfy does other things as well. So warm welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me.
So no problem. So I know that one of the things you've done is created an 8-figure Amazon brand yourself in a very short time. Is it 3 years that you've done that in, or something? 5 years?
Yeah.
3 years. Okay, so that's obviously quite the achievement. So that's something I want to dig into today. But I want to put the angle on it of surviving and thriving in difficult times, because obviously we're in unusual times right now, and I think it's not a bad thing to create anyway a business that's robust, right, in good times, but particularly we're focused on that now. So tell me the basic story there. Obviously 8 figures in 3 years, that's an impressive set of numbers. So what are the
Thanks.
basics? How did you arrive at that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was, with the caveat that it's not during COVID-19, so it was a little bit easier. But yeah, I mean, the story is like my business partner and I were best friends from college. We had come from tech, and so we had like a background in kind of like high growth companies. And yeah, I mean, we each put in, I think 20 grand into the business at the time. And we tried building actually like our own Shopify store for several months. And we realized like, oh man, this is really, really hard. Like finding customers, getting them to buy on our website. And we tried that probably for about 5 months. And then, what we decided to do is when we were running out of money is we're like, okay, and this was originally our passion project. And we're like, okay, screw, passion. We just need to make money. Cause like, at the end of the day, we're going to end up having to live with like our parents again. And that was kind of like a last resort. And so we kind of were just like, well, what about just like selling stuff on Amazon? We're buying everything there anyways. Like, can you even do that? We found a course online, like downloaded it. And honestly, we just pivoted. Like we didn't even spend a ton of time thinking about it. It was just like, this current business is not working. And yeah, like at the end of the day, we don't want to go back and move in with our moms. And so yeah, I mean, we kind of didn't look back. I mean, we were definitely like pretty lucky. I think our we started with 4 products at the same time. And so that helped us learn a lot. I don't necessarily recommend that strategy for people just starting out. I think it's probably better to go a little bit slower. But again, we were running out of money. We needed to like figure stuff out, and we hired a coach right in the beginning, and I think that was super helpful, just because he was already doing like 45 grand a month, but we were able to make so many less mistakes, and we still made plenty. Don't get me wrong, but by having that coach in your corner and just saying like, hey, you need to get used to giveaways. You need to order more inventory. You need to do this. You need to do this. Like, and really helped us like learning the basics in the beginning. Yeah, it was super helpful. And then maybe like our 6th, 7th product was just like a home run. And it basically, we had to borrow money from family and friends just to order more inventory to keep it in stock. And so it was kind of this Cinderella story to begin with, where the products that we started with, those first 4, they did okay. We discontinued most of them. Like we didn't reorder. To be honest, we learned a lot of lessons of like niches that were too competitive. But we had some that were like, we had one that was like a decent success and ended up dying a few months later. But it was like, okay, this really proves the model. And second, in that first month on Amazon, we did more than like 5 months on Shopify combined. And so we're like, okay, this really works. And so we just need to refine how we're choosing products. And so we really started focusing on that area of the business because we knew that would kind of control like our futures specifically on Amazon. yeah, and then we ended up doing a little over 2 million that first year. And then, yeah, once we hit that kind of home run product, we really started expanding that product line and really focusing there. And then that was just kind of how we basically got to the 10 million. We definitely borrowed a ton of money from family and friends that kind of help us again, like placing those POs, air shipping, everything, just because we couldn't get everything done. It was really sloppy, to be to be totally honest. We kind of like stumbled our way through it, but that was kind of a lot of the story.
Wow. Okay. So that's really quite the interesting story. I mean, so I was going to ask about the capitalization because obviously, if you're doing $2 million in a year, you're going to ramp up the amount of money you're putting into the machine to start with. But I just wanted to just go back to the Shopify store. I mean, very funny because this afternoon I've got a new podcast. I'm starting e-commerce leader with my friend Jason Miles, who is a massive Shopify fanboy and is
Mm-hmm.
doing very, very well with that and helps a lot of Amazon-based people to pivot some of their business over to Shopify. So interesting to have the opposite conversation where you found Shopify really, really hard. What was it about that you found so tricky? That's worth just briefly getting into.
Yeah. So I think that's a good question. So at the time, and we were thinking very like binary, right? And so we came from tech, and so the tech business model is very clear, right? You raise a lot of money, you need to grow faster than everyone else, which means you spend a lot more. You like every round of equity financing, you like kind of you dilute yourself, and hopefully at the end, like you're successful, and then you sell for a huge amount of money, you get a percentage of that, and you make a ton of money. And we'd seen that, and we kind of had mixed feelings around that. It's just like you're starting this business to be like kind of your own boss, but by raising venture capital, you kind of now have a boss, right? And you hear all these stories of these CEOs that get moved out of their own companies. And so we very early on made the distinction of like we want to bootstrap this company. And so, and yeah, that just basically means not taking out like for us, like equity financing. And so we were comfortable like raising debt, and that was like a very specific thing. But what we found was we were afraid of spending a lot of money on ads, to be honest, at the time. So we weren't like comfortable spending on like Facebook or even like Amazon, or this is like before Amazon, we're on Shopify. And so we're like, okay, well, the best way to do it is to build partnerships, and that comes like with our background. Like I was head of sales before, but yeah, partnerships, and then with blogs, so like doing like SEO content and stuff. But because we were bootstrapped and only had like a finite amount of money to start with, I think, at least for us, what we found is the time that it takes to get a blog from like zero to having the enough customers to generate enough income is just too long. And we were doing this full time. And so I think that was our challenge. If we had, kind of found like a more hybrid strategy, which is we figured out paid ads so we could actually generate more customers a lot faster, then I think that would have definitely worked on Shopify. But it was something that we weren't really comfortable with at the time, to be totally honest. And I think that's kind of why our Shopify was doomed from the beginning.
It may sound like a funny question to ask somebody when you get somebody on who's massively successful in an area to ask why they didn't do so well in another one. But I think it's important to, follow the reality of somebody's story, and that's interesting. Interesting reality. And I guess what happened on Amazon is that you turned your cash into cash again quicker than the model that you were trying to follow was going to do. And especially, if you're trying to work on something full time, you can't wait for something to take off, right?
Exactly.
So tell me about the next awkward question then. Sorry about this, but I just think you've obviously got the success in terms of the revenue. So we have to dig into the details. How much money did you end up borrowing that first year, if I may ask such a rude question?
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's a good question. So we borrowed originally, I want to say, we borrowed a lot. I think it was maybe 250 grand. And so, yeah, we went to like everyone that we knew that was high net worth. I think it started with like 30 from one friend and 30 from one of our parents. I think it was my mom. And so that started with 60, and it was going really well. and then we're introducing more products, and like that's like the fun thing is if your products take off, you need more cash again to keep them in stock. And so they kept doing really well. And so we just kept, compounding our problem. And then so we kind of refinanced out one of those 30, I think for like 100. But yeah, I would say in the first year, we probably raised, so no, maybe not 250, maybe it was 200 grand in that first year.
Okay, so I mean, I guess what's interesting about your background in tech is that you were quite comfortable with the idea of people raising millions of dollars in equity or possibly debt or probably both. So I guess for you, you weren't mentally phased by the idea of raising 200 grand in debt. And it sounds like you had enough high net worth individuals around you for that to be a possibility. So you didn't have to go to banks. Is that right? Or anybody
Right.
else?
So, I mean, I can only speak to the US in terms of like raising capital, but usually for like SBA loans, which are awesome, and I think we did that year two, you kind of need that 2 years of financials. And so we were definitely not bankable. I think we did raise maybe also 20 grand, I think from Deal Struck in that first year. And those are kind of like, it's almost predatory lending. It's not that bad. But it's super expensive. We're talking about like probably 18% a year. But again, it was just really about trying to stay in stock as we had like these great products. And at the time, I don't think we were focused enough on like really pushing on our suppliers to get terms. And I think that would have been like a good, more disciplined move that we would do now that we didn't do back then. But yeah, we were definitely comfortable. Me especially, like, yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit more wary of debt, but especially with everything that's kind of going on right now. But yeah, I mean, I was always like very, very aggressive in terms of like, this is how we scale and we don't have to give up equity. This is the best way to do it.
Yeah, and I like the thinking that comes from certain backgrounds. I mean, you had a certain way of thinking about, in a sense, you were used to a world of lots and lots of money, but that the cash comes at a very high cost, i.e. giving up potentially control of your own business and all that nightmare. So I suppose relative to that world, you were actually not being that aggressive. I suppose when you're used to somebody, raising $1 million seed capital and then 5 million in Series A and then 10 million in Series B, then I guess 200 doesn't sound like a lot of money. So, and I'm sure that that's part of the reason why you managed to get the money. Of course, the thing is that I do think it's important because a lot of people say things like, oh, but he/she started with a lot of money. And I think, well, sometimes what happens is that there are people with money out there. You just need to be good at multiplying it. And then the people with the money will trust it to you to multiply it, right? So I think you had already got that multiplication process going quite swiftly, hadn't you, after your sixth product or whatever it was?
Yeah. And I would say like, it came with time. I mean, a lot of it was just like, family members and they want to see you successful and stuff like that. And that's obviously really, really helpful. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, you're totally spot on. Like you just need to create a sense of trust that you know what you're doing. I think, and I mean, this is something that we've learned even back then. We definitely were not doing this. So just to be clear, but I think, some of the stuff that we started tracking was like, okay, what's our success rate and what's our failure rate and what's kind of like a neutral product for us. And then, how you define that and what's the percentages that fall into that and of each one. And so we were able to over time realize that our success rate, which we said was generating, I think, over $2,000 in profit per month by the end of the first 90 days of our product, is what we considered a successful product. And then neutral was just that it was break even, but below that. And then like, a loser was obviously just like not break even. And we realized that like our neutral and successful products represented, it was a really crazy amount, like maybe 90%. And it's like, okay. And this is when we got more sophisticated, obviously, but it's like, hey, okay, so if we have 90% chance of being neutral or successful, like, that's definitely something that you would invest more into, right? And so that's how we ended up getting more capital eventually, is just by having those kind of numbers dialed in. Versus in the beginning, we're like, hey, we're buying this product for $2, we're selling it for 20. I am selling 500 a day or 300 a day, and like I just need more money. And so like
Yeah.
it's come a long way. But yeah, those are some of the ways that we got better about it.
Yeah, and by the way, that's a pretty amazing. It's a quite a unique way of looking at it. I like that way of looking at it a lot because, in a way, once you eliminate the failures, if something break even or better, then you might as well take that bet because break even, the worst case scenario, you get your money back. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think a lot of people place either no kind of demands at all on a product except that it makes some kind of sales and that's just not enough because you can sell a lot of stuff and lose money on Amazon. This is one of the miracles of Amazon is sales, but the miracle is not profit rather, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
the other thing is that on the other hand, people put very high expectations on products. And actually, if you say, look, if it breaks even or better, we're doing fine, that lowers the barrier to, what counts as at least a survivable product. And I think that's a really important mental shift, which may explain why you took off so crazy. But another question I've got to ask then, what do you, I mean, first of all, thank you for being honest about you had not only like 5 months of failure working on it full time with your Shopify store, but your first, 2 or 3 products weren't that amazing. So it took the 6th or 7th product to get the home run. So I think there's a massive clue there. But what else would you attribute your initial success to? Because even with a lot of loans and all the rest of it, $2 million in your first year is not a common activity. So what do you attribute that um, explosive growth to, apart from the loans and
Yeah.
finding a product?
Wait, and sorry. So I just want to I want to make sure that we're on the same page, just because I don't want to some of the listeners to to think a bit differently. So when we talk about like neutral products and then like winner products,
Mm.
those are like basically to instill faith in someone that's going to let us borrow money
Yeah,
and feel comfortable about the down like basically that we've tracked our downsides and that
yeah,
we're minimizing the downside. But that doesn't
yeah.
necessarily mean that we keep the neutral products in our portfolio. So we'll
No, of
actually take
course.
yeah,
Yeah, of course. You
just to make
got to.
sure.
No. I get what you're saying. No, it's an
Yeah,
important point to make. No, you shouldn't keep mediocre products. And by the way, it
yeah,
is an important point to make because I have that conversation quite often
right,
with clients in our mastermind. A lot of whom are really super sharp business people, but everyone
right.
gets a bit of a blind spot around. Oh, but it's only making like 3% profit margin, but it's part of the brand. And I always think, well, yeah, but wouldn't it be better to have a product in 6 months there that is part of your brand and making you 25%, I mean, or 50
Totally.
or whatever? And I always
Yeah.
think that neutral product hanging on to thing, you're right, there is a problem with that. So I'm glad to hear you don't do that. I suppose I'd kind of assumed what you just explained, but you're right to
Yeah.
explain that. Yeah, it's about minimizing downside from the investment or debt purposes.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. Doesn't
100%.
mean you should hang on to rubbish products. No, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Very
No, because
important
we've
point.
done that. We've
Yeah,
definitely done that.
I think
And
everyone's
so
been there, right?
yeah. Because yeah, I mean the vanity metrics, it's great for your ego to have the higher revenue.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Okay, so yeah, to the other question was other things that we did. I think we did a good job somewhat focusing specifically on Amazon. I think and this is a double-edged sword, right? Like you know, a lot of people, at least from what I've seen anecdotally on the Amazon space, is that decided they want to do RA, they want to do wholesale, they want to do private label, they want to do merch, and they want to do them all at the same time, and then they want to build their brand on Shopify all within, let's say, the first year. And I think that's extremely challenging. And I and there's a balance, right? Because obviously, the more diversified you are, and especially during like an epidemic like this, it's nice in a lot of ways. If let's say your products are categorized not essential, you have, let's say, Shopify that can help you keep your income coming in and covering your operating expenses. But I think, I guess to answer the question about like our first year that helped us really grow is that we only focused on private label. Like that was the only thing that we did, and we were so addicted to Amazon and the fast growth, especially coming from like Shopify where we did pretty poorly. And then so it was just like, look, it's all about choosing the right product. We realized that was like the key to the business, especially back then. It was a lot easier to launch products. And so it's just like, if we can choose the right products that have the right demand that are not super competitive, then like we can scale this machine. And then, honestly, it was I spent a ton of time borrowing, asking and pitching people to get more money because that was like our biggest limiting factor at the time.
Yeah, and by the way, I think it's the biggest limiting factor that I've come across with pretty much anyone who's got pretty decent at product selection and launching. And as you say, these things go through waves. I mean, I think launching was easier when I got into this game about 5 years ago, and then there was a big sort of October 2016 sort of big watershed where you could no longer ask for incentivized reviews, and it's just got progressively harder, although more valuable. The marketplace is bigger, so if you can win a big percentage of the marketplace, it's more valuable than ever in terms of revenue, but getting harder. So yeah, and raising capital, apart from that, is the big barrier. So I think your way of putting things in a sort of investable, making your business very investable, or debt, you could raise debt. I guess it comes to the same thing. It's risking people's capital, isn't it, and hoping to return it with interest. The fact that you thought in those terms, I think, is really critical as far as I'm concerned. I like the way you've articulated that, and I think making your business investable is really important. People have this weird puritanism about it for some reason, like, oh, if it's not your own money, it's not a real business. I mean, again, I think your background really helped with that. Okay, great. So look, this is a very nice little episode in and of itself, but I think we should move on to the thing of, okay, you've got this wonderful business that you've created. Now, times are not as about explosive growth, and we're definitely in a massive bear market in a lot of product areas. So what do you think are the essentials for surviving in hard times? Let's put it more specifically. Once you've built a substantial business as you guys have, how do you protect it in a time where things contract greatly? What are the sort of principles that you're following right now?
Yeah. So I think now is a better time than ever to get really good at finance, and really digging into the numbers, the reporting, every area of your business. And yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of it's this situation has really helped us in terms of kind of slowing down and looking at our business really critically in terms of like the diversification, right? So like one, obvious one is like, Amazon kind of was just the arbiter of like, I guess, is your product essential or non essential right now? And that made a huge impact, obviously, for so many businesses that sell on the platform. And so I think it's, being really quick and nimble, like setting up your systems, your team, and just making sure that it's like, okay, you guys need to be everyone needs to be checking the restock reports every day, just to see if any of our products have moved from not essential to essential. And then really keeping track of like, okay, based on this, based on our sales right now, this is how much income we're bringing in every month. And then based on our operating expenses right now, this is how much we're at, and how, like, are we above break even? Are we below break even? And just really focusing on just putting yourself in a position where if things get like worse, like, you'll be okay. And if things get better, then obviously then things get better and you're good. But a lot, I know I have a lot of friends that were hit really hard, maybe in travel or specific party supplies categories, that that you're losing like 80-90% of sales. And so I think at that point you probably should focus on more of like a survival mentality, and just making sure that your income is coming in to cover your operating expenses, dropping your operating expenses as much as you possibly can, and just getting creative in terms of finding other ways to monetize like your current assets. So it might be your time, might be your team, might be your knowledge, maybe that's consulting, whatever it may be, but figuring out a way to last as long as you possibly can. And then but if you're doing really well, then obviously, like, maybe you're in the right category, then I think you have to get like really focused on something completely else. So like probably like really dialing in your inventory planning, your supply chain side, like also your finances still, but really focusing on getting inventory. Maybe you start utilizing air shipments a lot more and trying to not keep too much inventory on hand, just because you don't know when things will slow down. But yeah, those are some of the like quick things that I would be thinking about, depending on which group you fall into.
Yeah, I like that. There's a lot of very good basics. I mean, I think it's so interesting that the getting good at finances thing keeps coming up again and again in different contexts when people have been talking to me, a lot of business brokers recently, about preparing your business to sell or even creating a sellable asset, even if you're not going to sell it for years. The number one thing that keeps coming around again and again is know your numbers, have clean books. So, and again, this isn't just a thing that makes it desirable, but makes it actually, viable, survivable, if you like. So that's a really interesting thing that keeps coming up, and I guess it's a basic business discipline, right? And most of us are sales and marketing oriented, and we don't like our bookkeeping, but we've got to get good at that. The team thing is setting up your systems and team. We're going to talk about that separately, because I know that building processes to scale to 8 figures is in and of itself a challenge. But I think it's interesting what you're talking about, re-monetizing the assets you built already, including your knowledge and your team. And that's an interesting point. I haven't heard anyone say that, but obviously what strikes me about this landscape, and be interested to hear your take on this, is that quite a lot of businesses have got astronomically high demand, and they're struggling. Amazon's struggling to get enough staff and enough logistical capacity. Like air freight capacity has dropped because a lot of it was carried on air passenger planes, etc. And those guys presumably have a great need for capacity. And then there's a bunch of people who have a lot less demand, but maybe the same size team. So it's almost like we need to do sort of resource swap in some commercialized way, right? And I hadn't really thought of that, but it makes sense. I mean, is that something you've experienced yourself, or that your clients are experiencing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we have the brand management agency, and so we've been getting approached a ton because a lot of brick and mortar stores are closed, right? And so because of the lockdown, and so what that means is if they had a go to market strategy, let's say of getting into whatever these into Target stores, let's say, but they don't know at what point they're going to reopen, then they need to find a way to monetize. And so they're looking at e-commerce a lot of the time. And so I mean, it's kind of the choose your choose whether you want to do Shopify or Amazon. And so we're getting a lot of inbound interest for people that were planning on going to market in retail, and then they decided, like, actually we just want to do Amazon, can you help us? So I think that's like definitely something that Amazon sellers can take advantage of. You have this great skill set. You understand how Amazon works. You understand how to market there. You understand how to do the keyword research. A lot of these brands don't, and they don't want to spend the time to learn it. So I think that's a great way to like utilize your skill sets. Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that you can get creative. You can partner with somebody else that has financing, and then launch products together to to bring in maybe more cash. Work, talking to your suppliers, and then maybe doing like payment plans, or maybe seeing if there's other products that they can source for you that would be maybe in the essential category. Just other ways of kind of thinking a little bit out of the box. And you're obviously shifting focus, but I think it just depends on like, specifically which market you're selling in, and like how quickly you think they're going to recover, and using that with your best judgment to decide like what your strategy is going to be, for the next few months.
And it's worth gathering a bit of data around sorry, I'm just tapping away the notes here. By the way, folks, we always get notes at amazingfba.com/blog, just to confuse you, because podcast itself was reserved for the RSS feed, so don't go there unless you're a computer. But and I also mentioned, while I'm thinking of links, by the way, www.marketplaceops.com, which is, I know, where your marketplace, your brand management agency lives, because obviously you made a very good point that a lot of people that were going to be launching in brick and mortar are suddenly looking at Amazon. So as you say, that's a skill set that a lot of us can offer people. And partnering with people is interesting. And talking of essential categories or not, I mean, what counts as high demand categories varies quite a lot by country. For example, that I looked at some statistics the other day that the French are ordering more alcohol than normal, and the Americans are ordering less alcohol than normal, which I'm sure you can read a lot of bad things into that if you wish to, but it's quite country specific what the demand is. And then the view of the marketplace, in this case Amazon, of what is essential may be different again. So it's worth gathering a bit of data, I think, about that, rather than just assuming you know what's essential, or just working on what was essential last week, because these things shift a bit, don't they? Now that everyone's bought all the toilet roll in the Western Hemisphere, it's kind of shifting a bit.
That's so
So
true.
it's crazy, is it, the toilet roll thing? It's been
It's so
a sort of
funny.
meme. It's very funny, but like certain things, for example, eggs. I mean, this is a bit of a digression, but it makes you think about the difference between consumer mindset and what consumers actually need. Because
Yeah.
we have, for example, a lot of eggs. By the way, my wife buys in bulk, so we were very, very well set for this crisis. Her natural buying
I
behavior
should go to
works
your house.
beautifully. Yeah, they come to our house. We have a lot of toilet roll. But the
Nice.
point is that we buy a lot of eggs, and I don't find myself using them that much. I get through things like croissants and bagels I probably shouldn't be eating. But nevertheless, I wonder if that's true in other people's houses, because a lot of people have, sold out of eggs in supermarkets. So there is a certain sort of almost primal urge to buy what are perceived as basic stuff that your grandmother would have bought. And I
Hmm.
suspect a lot of it's going to sit on the shelf and not get used. So what are
Oh,
your
interesting.
thoughts about getting into the, understanding where consumers are going to be over the next few months? I mean, it's a difficult area to find a concrete handle on, but what's your thoughts on it?
That's a great question.
Hard to answer, I do realize.
Yeah, it's I think it depends on your situation. And so I guess I'll just try to like talk it through. So if you're in an essential category, then I think it's a good time, to keep introducing products, to the brand, because you're in an essential category. If you're in a non-essential category, then it's really like, again, like dialing in your numbers, figuring out like how bad were you hit, because that I think will determine how much time you have to make a decision, right? So if you got hit, I don't know, you were selling a product for cruise lines, for instance, you probably hit like 90% decrease in sales, and that means that this is will probably take longer for you to recover. Versus if you were, let's say, in a home and kitchen category, it's considered non-essential, but it maybe only had like a 20 to 30% increase, then I would be looking at it a little bit differently, versus that like 90% decrease. But I think yeah, one step is taking your situation, and no matter what, is looking at and maybe just creating like three case scenarios, right? And it's like, okay, this is my best case scenario where I think this is when things will reopen, and will be like my new normal. Like this is my medium case like scenario, and maybe it's things open up a little bit longer, and it's a little bit more severe of a drop in percentage. And then this is like my worst case scenario. And then looking at that, and often what I'll see is that like the worst case scenario is actually really not that bad. Like I know, like, okay, I need to do this, I need to do this, and then this is like how long we'll have, and we can find ways to cover that gap or whatever it may be by that time that happens. But I think being really disciplined and looking at those three models will really help, in terms of figuring out what strategy you decide to play. Like maybe you realize like, okay, I'm going to be like positive like 10K a month, like based on like my middle case like scenario. And so you can do a few things. You can just save that 10K now and just become really, really disciplined on that. You can start pushing off some of your payments to help you like with cash flow with some of your manufacturers, or do payment plans. You can cut like any unnecessary software and stuff like that. You can I know at least like a lot of American credit card companies are pushing off interest payments, so you could potentially utilize that, as well as like federal grants that the government's doing. But getting like really looking at that situation is like, okay, I want to just hoard as much cash as I possibly can, and maybe even taking out like one of these like SBA loans, at least for us like Americans, to have as like an insurance policy. And I'm gonna like kind of just like weather this storm. But yeah, if you got hit by like 90%, then I think it kind of behooves you to move really quickly. Maybe looking at your team, and yeah, unfortunately, maybe having to do layoffs. But and then like really dropping like a lot of your operating expenses as low as you possibly can, and then rebuilding revenue streams in another way, because going from 100% to 10% is obviously a huge drop. And so just thinking about like, okay, how do I get back into like a break even kind of situation?
Wow, that's a really nicely sort of what's the word, strategic response, and the fact that you didn't know the answer meant that you had to sort of think through the process, which is really great. I mean, none of us know the answer of what's going on in the consumer's mind now and in 3 months time, right? We just can't know that because it's going to be influenced by governments, but then sometimes weird stuff happens, like the government announces lockdown and suddenly you can't get toilet roll. That's not something
Yeah.
you could predict so easily, right? So but I really like that. I mean, I suppose in essence what you're saying is do your scenario planning, make sure you can survive the worst case scenario, and then after that everything's gravy, I guess, in certain ways,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's easy to say, and as you say, if you've had a 90% drop in sales, there's going to be some horrible difficult decisions to make. But even then, I like the idea of repurposing your team. If you build up a team that can sell travel pillows all day long or something, there's no particular reason why you can't retool that team really quickly to resell I don't know, hand sanitizer, because Amazon is Amazon, selling is selling. The terms of
Exactly.
service is the same, the photography rules are the same, so I really like that way of thinking, and that's a very resourceful way of thinking. So that's great, thank you so much for that. Talking of team, we're going to have a quick episode shortly about building processes, culture, and team, because I think that's um, the idea of building in this kind of scenario feels a bit scary, but I do think that that's also a great asset that a lot of us have got. So we'll be discussing that. But for now, Fernando, thank you for your resourceful thinking and very helpful um, way of thinking about this whole scenario.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael.